Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it a couple of more minutes just to make sure that there's no one else that wants to join the meeting. Okay, I think that's enough time for us to let anybody in that wants to come in. So hello, everyone. Thank you guys so much for attending our very first ever Q&A session for the Wellstar Clinical Fellowship in Clinical Ethics. We, once again, are so grateful that you guys are here and taking time out of your busy days to learn a little bit more about our program. My name is Lily. I am the program coordinator for the ethics department here at Wellstar, and I'm going to be one of the moderators for today's event. I just want to go ahead and give a quick introduction to the members of our team that so graciously decided that they were going to be here and help out with us. So first we have Jessie. She is our director of the Clinical Ethics Fellowship here. And then we have two of our clinical ethicists on staff here. We have Bridget, and then we also have Mary Ann. Not sure if Mary Ann had to hop off because I know that she had some consults to take care of, but I think I see Bridget here. And then we also have two of our fellows from this year's cohort. We have Kelly and Burra. So thank you guys for helping out and answering some questions. They can introduce themselves a little bit further if they want to once they have the mic. That's just like a quick overview of who you're going to be hearing from today. Before we dive into the actual presentation, I just want to go over some quick housekeeping. So first, you have noticed that we are recording. You should have gotten a little notification. So we just want to make sure that anybody who wasn't able to come today is still able to get the information from today's presentation, because we know that everyone has very busy schedules. So we just want to make sure it's accessible to everyone. As such, you might notice that you're not allowed to come off of mute or have your cameras on. That's just because we want to protect your privacy if we do end up uploading this onto the internet. I know not everyone is comfortable with their faces and their names being on there. So of course, this is a Q&A. We do want you guys to ask some questions. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. I promise I am keeping a close eye on it. And all of your questions will be answered by the end. If there's something that's really pertinent to a specific slide, I'll go ahead and interrupt whoever's speaking and ask that question. But the majority of the questions are going to be saved for the end. So please feel free to type, ask away. Sorry that you can't come off mute, but you know, it's kind of a little better, you know, it's less nerve-wracking. So anybody have any quick questions before we get started? I'll keep an eye on the chat, but in the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Jessie.
Thanks so much, Lily. Hi, everybody. Very nice to meet you all. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us today. As Lily said, the goal here is, this is a Q&A. So my goal is to make this as helpful and as informative to you all as you all are considering or thinking about applying to fellowship programs, and specifically Wellstar's fellowship program. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We will make sure to get to all of your questions. And if for whatever reason we don't have an answer at the moment, I will make sure to get back to you with that information. So with that being said, want to go over a couple things today. This is just kind of our agenda for the day. We'll start off by talking a little bit about Wellstar Health System in general, just to give you a sense of, maybe you've never heard of Wellstar before. It's very possible that's the case, especially if you're not local here in Georgia. So, to tell you a little bit about Wellstar Health System. We'll then talk a little bit about our Wellstar Ethics Program. Then I'll kind of go into an overview of our fellowship. So we'll talk about our mission, vision, and values, what the training and fellowship requirements look like. We'll talk about the evaluation and feedback that we provide to our fellows. We'll hear from our wonderful fellows, Kelly and Burra, just where they can kind of shed some insight on a day in the life of a fellow. We'll talk a little bit about why train at Wellstar. There's lots of programs out there. What makes Wellstar unique? I'll talk a little bit about the application process, and then we'll make sure, as I said, to leave time at the end to answer the questions that you have put in the chat. So as we go through the program or the presentation, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and Lily will help make sure that we get those addressed at the end of the presentation. So just to kind of briefly talk about, Wellstar here in general, Wellstar is one of Georgia's largest and most integrated healthcare systems. We have 11 hospitals, 3 inpatient hospice facilities, 5 health parks, and several ambulatory care sites. And you can read for yourself some of these other fun facts and figures about Wellstar Health System. For purposes of talking about our clinical ethics fellowship, our fellows at this point in time are really working in these hospitals that you have kind of on the left part of the screen. So our fellows are not at this point going to the hospitals in Augusta. They're primarily working in the 10 hospitals in the metro Atlanta and kind of surrounding areas. So these hospitals here on the left. There may be opportunities to rotate in Augusta perhaps next year. That's to be determined. Right now, we're actively working to kind of grow and develop our ethics program in the Augusta hospitals. And so it'll just really depend on, where we're at in that process to see if it makes sense to have fellows maybe spend a week or 2 or 3 out in Augusta just to get a sense of how those hospital systems work. But primarily, and for, currently our fellows are in the kind of 10 hospitals in this kind of Atlanta or metro Atlanta area. So with that, if Bridget, I think you're on. If that's the case, let's turn it over to you, and you can talk a little bit about our ethics program here at Wellstar.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Bridget. I am a clinical ethicist here. I'll just give you a little intro of me at the beginning. Clinical ethicist here. I did do the fellowship program. I finished in this past July. So I also can answer maybe some questions about the fellowship experience as we go. I will preface, I am on call and I'm actively waiting for a call from a physician. So hopefully it won't interrupt this because I'm really, really excited to be here. So our ethics program does a lot of things here at Wellstar across the system, as I think is becoming more popular for a lot of ethics programs. The number one thing that we do and what consumes most of our time is our consultation work. We are very involved at all of our hospitals. We'll get into what that looks like, but actively taking consults. We did over 1,000 consults last year. So just in terms of volume, what you can expect, it is very, very high. We are a busy service. We are constantly juggling a lot of things, which keeps us all on our toes and is super interesting. We're also very involved in education across the system. We do education with all different types of providers. We're very involved in the nursing education, whether it's new nurses or nurses who are transitioning to a different type of practice. We're very involved in that. We do a lot of policy work as well. We, as an ethics program, own many policies, 20 or so policies that we are constantly, working on, evolving, making sure they're up to date, or sort of adjusting to go into the new cycle of policy work. So there's always stuff going on there. One of the ways that we're super integrated through our ethics consultation is by rounding in the hospitals. Both those who are actively sort of the on-call ethicist or not are involved in rounding in the hospital. We participate in rounds in all different units, ICUs certainly, but we're also in some of the NICUs. We attend hospital medicine rounds. We do an integrated rounding with our palliative medicine service at one of our hospitals. So we have a lot of really interesting stuff going on there. Also involved in hospital level committees and or task forces, like mortality and morbidity committees, things like that. We have a presence on a lot of different committees. I personally sit on the Nurse Wellbeing Council, so that's another place that we're plugging in there, which I'm going to skip ahead because that ties into my moral distress work. I am our moral distress specialist here at Wellstar. I have been trained in that, and that's something we're actively integrating into our service to have a more robust moral distress support system to offer, which is how I got plugged in with the Nurse Wellbeing Council. We're also working on quality improvement all the time. We have lots of projects going on. Sort of everyone has their own project, so that's something that we're really passionate about and wanting to make sure that we're constantly evaluating our own service and how we can continue to improve and work better with our hospital systems. Also very much involved in academic research and scholarship. Many of our attendings are working on papers. There's always really interesting stuff going on. Just for the sheer volume that we see some really, really interesting stuff that we often end up writing, whether we go into the full sort of peer-reviewed type of process or if we're writing just sort of like ethics inserts for different journals. We have a lot of different ties that are really, really interesting. And then, of course, conferences and presentations come out of the really interesting cases that we see. So we're doing a lot of things all the time. It's very exciting. So there's always kind of something that you can plug into.
Thanks, Bridget. And before we jump into Marianne, I just want to add that a couple things. One, that our fellows, all the things that Bridget listed out, and there's probably even more that we do that weren't able to fit all on the page. Our fellows are very much integrated and involved in all of those things. So policy work, consults, education, rounding, all of those things our fellows are very much actively a part of and involved in. And then the second thing I just wanted to also highlight is, unlike many other health systems or ethics programs, we do not have an ethics committee. So all of the ethics work that is done across our hospitals and across our hospital system is done by our ethics team, the dedicated employees. We're all healthcare ethics consultant certified. And so all of the ethics work that's done is done by our ethics team, which I know is a little bit unique compared to some other hospitals and health systems. So with that, I want to turn it over. I think I know Marianne's on call as well, but I'd like to turn it over to her to kind of just give you a little introduction of who is on the team.
So I joined at just the right time because it's right when my slide came up. So I'm sorry, I am on call and I got a call back from a physician, so I had to jump off. So really excited to talk to you all about our incredible program, what we do here at Wellstar Ethics Service, and introduce you a little bit to our team members just from a global perspective. I'll start with myself because that's the easiest one. I've been at Wellstar for over 2 years. I have a really long 30 plus years in ethics and have a nursing background, which is adds to the diversity of the ethicists that we have here at Wellstar. And this is, as everyone knows on my team, this is my dream job. This is an incredibly diverse group of ethicists. We are all very, very passionate. See all those happy smiley faces? It's because they are engaged in work that they find incredibly meaningful. And I know for me, it's a privilege and an honor to do this work and to work with this team. So just briefly, so I don't want to take any time away from all this other information you're going to receive. We have Jason, who we report to, who's an executive leader within the organization, a huge advocate for us and make sure we have the resources and the personnel that we need to do the important work that we do. Incredibly supportive and available to all of us, which we find incredibly an advantage for us as ethicists. We have 3 directors that are over each of the groups. That would be Brian, Stephen, and Joe. They are very supportive of their ethicists that work in the particular region. And they are your go-to person to provide support from a leadership perspective and also guide us to do the incredible work that we do. And then we have, you've already met Jesse, who not only does ethics work, but also is in charge of our fellowship program. Bridget, who's also an ethicist, who works on our moral distress program. And then the rest of us, myself, Charles, Mike, Anna, and Abby, are all full-time ethicists working in the various groups on very diverse, high complexity, interesting consults. I can say this, especially this last week. I mean, I think this every week, but I've been doing this for a very long time, and the cases are really interesting, and the volume of cases really allows you to grow and expand your skills and experiences, and just incredible work that we do. So myself, I have a nursing background. Charles has a philosophy background. Mike has a background in law. Anna is just super smart in background on all kinds of things. And Abby's a speech language pathologist. So you can see that we all come from various backgrounds, again, all very passionate and experienced with ethics. And this is a team that works together, enjoys our work as a team. And I feel very privileged at this point in my career to be a full-time ethicist with these amazing colleagues. So I'll stop there because I could go on and on. Anything else you want me to hit on, Miss Bridget? Jesse?
No, I think you hit it all. I think want to highlight that you obviously see the sheer size of our team. I think we're one of the largest clinical ethics consultant teams in the country. So, from the perspective of as you're thinking about different fellowship programs, it's a unique opportunity to be able to work with and learn from a large group of ethicists. We all kind of come with our own, obviously, unique academic backgrounds and styles. And I think that's what makes our fellowship program so enriching, is that, each week that you're on call, it might be with a different ethicist, and you can see how their style, how they work, how they write notes, how they approach a case. And then, the idea is that as a fellow, you kind of learn from everybody on the team and take bits and pieces. Oh, I really like how Marianne does that. I really like how Bridget does that. I really like how Joe does that, and ultimately develop your own style based on the exposure that you see with all the folks on the team. So I just want to emphasize, that we do have quite a large team, and I think that is certainly an advantage for those that are in the training or the fellowship kind of role.
And I'm happy to introduce our current fellows, whose beautiful photos that I've just now seen are up on the screen. So we have Kelly Turner, Georgia, I always butcher her name, I'm sorry, Georgia, and Burra. All 3 are excellent fellows, and we're really enjoying spending time with them as our newest group of fellows. And I think they're going to provide you with more information as this program progresses, as this Q&A progresses.
Thanks, Marianne. Thanks for taking the time. I know you're super busy on call, so thank you for joining us there. So want to jump into the setting. So as Marianne kind of alluded to when she was talking about the different directors and then the ethicists kind of within that kind of operate under each director, we're divided into 3 regions. And again, I just want to reiterate that we're really talking about these hospitals here on the left portion of the screen. We're not talking about on the very right, the Augusta hospitals. So on the left portion of the screen, we're divided into 3 regions. And you can sort of, region 1 is Canastone Hospital, Windy Hill. I won't go through all of the names of the hospitals, but essentially we divide the region based on, just to make kind of more evenly distribute between, to make sure each region is roughly seeing the same amount of volume, and also recognizing some of the geographical distribution of our different hospitals. So our region 3 are going to be our more rural hospitals, and they're going to be, a little bit farther out. Region 2 is kind of more in the metro Atlanta area, but also also a bit spread out. And then Region 1 is going to be Kennestone and Windy Hill. Kennestone is our big flagship hospital. It brings in the most volume, and so that's why it's really Kennestone and Windy Hill are the two hospitals together there. Again, so it all kind of evens out in terms of consult volume. So in a given week, you're going to have 3 ethicists on call. You're going to have 1 ethicist per region that's going to be on call. And that's on any given week. We're a 24/7, 365 service. And then at the end of the week that we have a handoff, and we can get into that a little bit more later. But basically the two of the ethicists on the region are going to hand off to one of the ethicists, and that person is going to cover the entire system for the weekend. And so that's kind of how our system currently works. So 3 ethicists, 1 on call per region during the week, and then 1 attending will cover the entire system over the weekend. I think, it's important to highlight that, due to the kind of geographical distribution of our hospitals, we see a variety of different types of cases. We encounter a variety of different types of populations, and that leads to a pretty big diversity in ethics consults, right? Each region, while there's certain types of consults that span across each region that we're going to see no matter what region you're on, there are certain types of consults that we get that are very region specific. And so, for our fellows that rotate among the different regions, it gives them an opportunity to have an exposure to a wide variety of cases, of hospital cultures, of patient populations, and ultimately helps equip them with the tools for working in a variety of healthcare settings once they, graduate the fellowship and are ready to move on, for full-time work. So we'll talk a little bit more about our processes later, but just wanted to give you all a sense of kind of what how we kind of distribute and how we kind of divide out our regions. I also want to highlight that for our regions 1 and regions 2, we have designated offices. So for our fellows, we have designated office space for our fellows in our Kennestone office, as well as designated office space in our Cobb Hospital office, which is in region 2. And then we also have designated office space in our 1800 building, which is kind of more our corporate office. That's where Jason, our AVP, works. That's where Bridget and my offices are, and as well as Lily's office. So there are office spaces for our fellows in our various locations. We're still working on office space for region 3. So we kind of have a little bit of a different system for fellows that are on and for attendings that are on for region 3. But just to give you a sense that there are kind of landing spots, at least in regions 1 and regions 2 for the fellows. And then when fellows are not on call, there's also a landing spot in our corporate office for fellows as well there. So we can jump to the next slide if that's okay. And I want to just talk a little bit about our clinical ethics kind of program, give a little bit of an overview of our fellowship. So our aim of the fellowship is to promote advanced competencies in our fellows such that graduates are prepared for employment as clinical ethicists or ethics program leaders in a variety of healthcare settings. This is a one-year full-time program. And our training is based on the American Society for Bioethics and Humanities core competencies for healthcare ethics consultation, and the most current competencies and milestones identified within the field. And really, I'd say our focus is on the ground, hands-on experience. That's really the focus of our fellowship. It's getting into the hospitals, talking with patients, talking with providers, mediating conflict, facilitating family meetings. It's very much those practical skills is kind of the central focus of our fellowship. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what our call requirements are, and you'll get a sense of, really how much emphasis we really do put on getting that on the ground practical experience. Next slide, please. So let's talk briefly about our mission, vision, and values. So our mission is to graduate fellows who excel as clinical ethicists and ethics program leaders. Our vision is to shape the future of the field in ways that markedly enhance support for ethical dimensions of patient care. And our values are: we promote quality, we nurture practical learning, and we innovate training. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so let's talk about training. So we'll talk a little bit about our fellowship requirements. We'll talk about this training structure, and then we'll talk about the evaluation and feedback. So and look, this is kind of a breakdown of what our fellowship requirements are. So when a fellow comes in, this is, we kind of in the first week, we really sit down and talk about, okay, throughout this 1-year fellowship, these are the expectations. And then throughout the course of the fellowship, we're constantly checking in and making sure that our fellows are, keeping up with and on pace to complete the requirements by the end of the fellowship. So I'll just kind of go through each box pretty briefly. And if you have more questions, feel free to put them in the chat. So our fellows are required to be on call 28 weeks and 12 weekends out of the year. So that's a little bit more than half of their time in the fellowship they are on call. And again, just to reiterate, that's, the best way to learn doing ethics consultation is by doing. And so we really have our fellows in there on the ground doing clinical ethics work, for a good chunk of their fellowship. And, again, with the goal so that by the end of the fellowship, they are able to independently, be an effective clinical ethicist. For the first 4 weeks of the fellowship, our fellows will be they shadow and attending, and that's really just to get them acclimated to Georgia, to the Metro Atlanta area, to how our processes work, to our different people on our team, all of those things. And then once they've had that 3 to 4 week period of shadowing, then they can sign up to be on call, and I'll talk about the different phases of the fellowship. But just to give you all a sense, we have a call schedule list that's usually made 6 months in advance, where the team is on call, is signed up to be on call, for their region, every few weeks, right? And what the fellows will do is once they've, started and they're in that shadowing period, they will sign up to be on call the weeks that work best for them. And we have guides for, okay, in the first few months, you should be on call X number of weeks and X number of weekends for the next few months. So we have guides to make sure that they ultimately hit their 28 weeks and 12 weekends on call. But the idea is that the fellows will sign up to be on call in the weeks that work best for them. And the idea is that they try to rotate pretty evenly so that they can be on call with all of the ethicists on the team relatively evenly. Obviously, it's not always going to be a perfect math is not going to always work, but try to get them exposure to being on call with all of the different ethicists on the team, and also rotating among the regions fairly evenly as well, so they get that exposure to the different types of hospitals and the different regions. So that's really what consultation requirements look like. Next, we have teaching requirements. So fellows are required to teach or co-teach 4 education sessions during the course of the fellowship. We do a lot of nursing education as well as medical resident education. So there are plenty of opportunities throughout the year for fellows to team up with an attending to teach or to co-teach. And we try to make, anytime a new opportunity comes up, we try to share that with the fellows and say, hey, I'm going to be teaching on such and such date if anyone wants to join. But also the fellows are encouraged to reach out to the different attendings and just say, hey, I know you teach on this type of, to this nursing cohort. Would it be possible for me to join you for the next one? So there's ample opportunity for teaching and for hitting those requirements. Scholarly work. So fellows are required to submit at least 1 manuscript to a peer-reviewed journal. Our AVP, Jason, he actually is an editor for a couple of journals. And so they're always looking for submissions. So that's a pretty easy requirement to hit if the fellow decides to kind of submit to one of those journals. But then there's always opportunities for authoring or co-authoring papers or articles to submit to various journals. Quality improvement. So our fellows will develop and complete a small QI project during the course of the fellowship. The idea is that it's fairly small in scale because the hope or the idea is that they will develop, plan, and implement their QI project by the end of their fellowship. We kind of span a wide range on what quality improvement projects look like, and I will work closely with the fellow, as well as we have a research team, Dave and Nicole, and as well as other folks on the team that will help provide guidance and help think through ideas. We also kind of have a running list of quality improvement ideas that we as attendings, just as things come up, we might it would be so nice for someone if someone could work on this, and we'll just kind of document that. We have a document called a platform called OneNote where we can just kind of have a parking lot of ideas. And so we also have a running list of different QI project ideas. So if a fellow maybe can't come up with one on their own or is struggling to think of something, they could always refer to that and take one of those ideas and run with it. Something else that we do as well is a lot of rounding. I think Bridget might have already touched on that, but as part of fellowship requirements, it's rounding to different rounding in different hospitals and different units. A lot of rounding is already baked into our call weeks, and so I think Burra and Kelly might talk a little bit more when we get to kind of what a day in the life might look like. But as part of our call week schedule, or as kind of what we do during our call weeks, we do a lot of rounding naturally, and so fellows are just inevitably are going to get that exposure to rounding in different units in different hospitals. And then fellow education. So we have about once a month, we have fellow education. A different attending on the team will lead the education. Usually whoever's leading the education will send an article or a couple articles a couple weeks in advance so that the fellows can read and be prepared for the education. And then the education is very relaxed. It's just it's mostly the attending leading discussion, asking questions based on the articles, based on the fellows, current experience thus far about the particular topic. Kind of going back to the practical element of clinical ethics, a lot of our education is very skill focused and it's very practical, focused. So it's not as much, we're not talking as much theory, we're really talking about on the ground, practical matters. So it could be anything from, thinking through what elements go into a capacity assessment and thinking about decision-making capacity and surrogate decision-making, to responding to emotion, to how do I introduce self and service in various scenarios. So we do try to make the focus very practical, skill-based, but we also cover topics that and have readings that we assign that also are covered or that are required readings for when you study for the HECC certification. So throughout the course of the fellowship, our fellows are getting exposure to some of the core readings that go into studying for and preparing for the HEC certification. We also do external rotations. So fellows will have the opportunity to rotate with different clinical services. So care coordinators, nursing leadership, palliative, spiritual health. And that really is to get them exposure to, okay, how do other services within the hospital operate, services that we tend to work closely with, so we can just see how are they approaching things, say from a care coordination perspective, a complex discharge case, right, where we might get consulted from an ethics standpoint, for guidance, but what is the care coordinator doing from their perspective, or a spiritual health, when we have a patient who, maybe is the patient is doing really, really poorly, really poor prognosis, but, families waiting for a miracle, right? And maybe spiritual health gets consulted. How do they approach that conversation versus, how maybe an ethics consultant might approach it? So it gives the fellows exposure to just the different services within the hospital, and I think helps kind of enrich their appreciation and understanding of kind of what these other services do and how we work together as well. We're also open to, if a fellow has a particular interest in, rotating with a certain service, I'll do whatever I can to make that happen. So for example, last year we had a fellow who was very interested in pharmacy ethics. And so he reached out to me and he was like, hey, I would really love to do a rotation with someone from a pharmacy team just so I could see how they operate. I reached out, the pharmacy team was more than willing to have him join. They rolled out the red carpet for him, did a whole presentation for him, invited him to come back for subsequent meetings. So it's certainly open to whatever the fellow would like to do. I will try to do everything in my power to make that external rotation happen, if it's going to help enrich the fellow's learning. Next, we do simulations. So we do monthly simulations. This is where we get paid actors to come in, and we have a simulation lab in our 1800 building, which is I guess our more corporate office. They have a simulation lab, and you basically walk in and it feels like you're walking right into a hospital room. And so we get paid actors to come in once a month, and essentially I'll write scenarios based on actual cases I was involved in or my colleagues were involved in, and we will have the actors who are absolutely incredible act out the simulation, or act out the scenario, and each fellow has an opportunity to go in and be the ethicist. How would they, if they're the ethicist and this is the scenario, how would they do? What would they do? How would they say it? What would be their approach? And it really allows our fellows from very early on, because we start these simulations month 2 of the fellowship, where in real life they're nowhere near, leading family meetings or having complex or complicated discussions. But early on in the simulation, it allows them to start practicing and honing those skills. So that way, by the time they are ready, in month 4, 5, 6, whatever it may be, that this is not the first time that they're ever having to go introduce themselves to and facilitate a family meeting, right? So we try to help fellows get prepared early on by doing these monthly simulations. And then finally, our fellows take the HECC certification. We cover the costs, and the exam is offered twice a year, November and May. It's required to have 400 hours in order to qualify for the exam. So our fellows typically will take it in May, because most don't come in with the required hours and experience that's needed to take the exam. As I said, throughout the course of the fellowship, our education readings touch on or actually incorporate a lot of the required readings to study for the HECC exam. So we help our fellows get prepared that way. And then we also, about a month or so before the May exam, we offer, like Joe, one of our directors, he offers a prep course. Basically, he'll spend a few hours. You'll go through a practice exam. You'll talk through the answers and just sort of offer a prep course for how to prepare and take the exam. I don't think we've had any fellow has ever had any issue passing the HEC certification. So, I think just it's sort of built into our program to help prepare and make sure our fellows are prepared to take the exam come May. Next slide, please, Lily. In addition to, what we just talked about, the requirements, I want to add other features of our fellowship. So we have mentorship. After about a couple months into the program, fellows will select a mentor, and that will be somebody in attending on the team that they, work well with, or they feel that they'll learn a lot from, or someone that they can really, that can offer them good guidance. And basically, they'll establish a mentor-mentee relationship, and for the rest of the year, or rest of the fellowship, they'll meet about once a month, maybe more if needed, basically to check in, bounce ideas off of one another, see how things are going, offer that extra layer of support for the fellows. So we do have that built into our fellowship program, and I think, our fellows, I think, take a lot of value, as well as the attendings, and being able to have that protected time to meet one-on-one with the fellow. And just make sure that they're doing well in the program, offer any guidance that they can. When it comes time to start searching for jobs, they'll offer guidance there, and just as I said, another layer of support throughout the fellowship. We also, assuming finances are all good, which so far that we've never had an issue with. We'll pay for a fellow to go to a conference. Most of our fellows typically go to ASBH. So we'll cover the costs for the conference, for travel, for accommodation, all of that. And we also cover the cost for ASBH membership for the year. And then we also, each year it's a little bit different, but we also offer various trainings, additional trainings that will help with the fellows' growth and development. So we offer, access to trainings like Vital Talks, motivational interviewing, advanced care planning, facilitator training, medical terminology courses. And if a fellow finds a training that they're like, oh, that would be awesome to do, and they bring it to me, I'll talk to Jason and I'll see if we can make it happen. We're very open to, any training that you think will help enhance your skills and your development in the clinical ethics program. So those are just a couple of additional things that we have and that we offer in the fellowship program. So we'll just briefly here talk about our stages of the fellowship or our training structure. I want to be very clear from the get-go and highlight that we recognize that every fellow is coming in with their own level of experience, knowledge base, background, etc. And so the way that one fellow might move through the program might be very different than how another fellow might move through the program. If we have somebody coming in that has extensive clinical experience and is, their second home is walking through the halls of the hospital, they may be advancing more quickly when it comes to patient interaction, provider interaction, but maybe they take a little bit longer with, writing notes that require fewer edits. So I just want to highlight that we really try to tailor the experience to each fellow, and taking into account, where are they coming from, what's their what's their level of experience in entering the program, what's their knowledge base in entering the program, and then really work with them, and help them progress through the follow, such that they're challenged, but that they're not pushed beyond their limits. So we have a few stages of the fellowship. The first one, as I already mentioned, is observer. That's really the first 3 to 4 weeks. They're coming in, they're kind of getting acclimated to our program. They're shadowing the different attendings that are on call. And once they move out of the observer role, they move into active learner with direct supervision. And that's where fellows start to take a little bit more of an active role. So maybe they start to do intake when a new consult comes in. Or maybe they have a low stakes conversation with a bedside nurse. Or maybe maybe they're taking first stab at drafting a first draft of a note, right? With the understanding that there'll probably be heavy edits needed from the attending. So that's when they just start to get their feet wet, start talking with different providers. As I said, maybe having low stakes conversations with patients. But still being very much, a lot of oversight still from the attending, but, we're starting to kind of loosen the reins there. Then they'll move into the active learner with direct supervision state part 2. That's where they're taking on more responsibility. So now they're doing intake, they're maybe having conversations with patients and providers and family members. They're drafting notes that were requiring fewer edits. There may be, challenging themselves to have more difficult conversations with maybe a disgruntled family member, right? So they're starting to really take a more of an active role in the consultation process. They also maybe start taking pager responsibility. So we have an app called Perfect Serve, and that's basically a HIPAA compliant platform to communicate with providers about patients. And so anytime an ethicist is on call, they'll be on call for Perfect Serve, meaning if a provider reaches out and says, hey, I got an ethics consult, and it's, it'll be directed to the ethicist in that respective region. And so in this stage, the fellow will now start taking first call on Perfect Serve, whereas before it was the attending, right? So anytime an ethics consult comes in, via Perfect Serve, it'll come to their phone. So that's kind of what stage, that second part of the active learner with direct supervision looks like. By the third stage, or by active learner with indirect supervision, the fellow is really doing a bulk of the consult work. So they're doing intake to resolution. They're having conversations with patients, families, providers. They're drafting notes that are requiring very few, if any, edits. They're facilitating family meetings. They're really able to do a lot of the stuff fairly independently, but maybe still with needing some, review and oversight, a little bit of oversight from the attending. But again, they should really be at the point where they're almost ready to be independent. And then the final stage is independent practitioner, and as it kind of the name suggests, able to really do cases from intake to resolution. Without any need for guidance or overstep by the attending. Now, of course, fellows are always encouraged to seek out guidance. As attendings, we reach out to one another and we say, hey, I got a really difficult consult. Can somebody, can we talk it through? So that's always on the table, regardless of what stage a fellow is in, even in the independent practitioner stage. But really, the independent practitioner is that they're essentially able to handle the consult from intake to resolution and really require no or to very, very little or no oversight by the attending ethicist. So I think that is, and I guess one final thing I'll just highlight there is, as Bridget mentioned before, we are an extremely high volume service. And so, your weeks on call, you're seeing anywhere from, I'd say 5 to 15 consults, give or take. And so each, there's significant growth even from week to week, because you're just getting so much exposure to so many different types of consults. And so that's how you're able to really quickly progress in this 1-year fellowship. Okay, I'm almost done talking, I promise. I know you all want to hear from Kelly and Burra, so let me get to, let me just go through this really quickly, and then I'll get over to Kelly and Burra. So evaluation and feedback. So we offer different kinds of feedback. After a week on call, after a fellow is on call for a week, they'll sit down with the attending ethicist, and the attending will offer some guidance and feedback. And there'll be an opportunity for the fellow to self-reflect and also talk about what went well in the week, what are areas I want to work on in the upcoming weeks, and the attending will sit down with them and have that conversation. They'll also document that in a forms document that will be sent to the fellow as well as the other attendings on the team, just so that way we can all kind of keep up week to week with how each fellow is progressing through the fellowship. We have a midpoint cumulative evaluation, and that's kind of at the midpoint. We just sort of stop and check in and look at, different skills and competencies, and, really talk through how is the fellow doing, and really what do they need to work on in the second half of their fellowship. We'll also do an end of year cumulative evaluation, and during these cumulative evaluations, it will be myself, the fellow, and the fellow's mentor that will be part of that conversation. After each monthly simulation, we offer verbal as well as written feedback. And then finally, there's going to be regular check-ins with myself, the fellowship director, as well as the fellow's mentor. And so that's kind of a quick overview of the type of evaluation and feedback we get. Now I just want to turn it over to Burra and Kelly, our current fellows. We also have Georgia, who's not able to join us because she's on call, and it sounds like they're quite busy today. But love to hear from Burra and Kelly. Maybe Burra, if you could start by talking about, briefly our on-call weeks, and then Kelly, feel free to, chime in there, and then maybe Kelly can talk a little bit about our off-call weeks.
Thank you, Jesse. Hi, everyone. My name is Burak Koroba, and I am one of the fellows this year. I'll talk to you briefly about our on-call week. Like Jesse mentioned earlier, we try to schedule so that one fellow will be able to be on rotation with each of the attending ethicists, so that we will not kind of be with one particular ethicist disproportionately to others. So we come together when we're doing our scheduling to see, okay, these are the weeks we have to be on the call, and then we try to distribute ourselves so we can do it evenly. That way we know that we are also having the experience of being with different ethicists to see what they do, how they do things, and be able to learn from all of them. So that we do that together, our scheduling. Then also, just to mention, we have 3 different regions. So when whatever region you're on, we meet in the office on Monday morning first thing, because there's always going to be a handoff at around 10 o'clock. Handoff is when those who were working the previous weekend will then hand off or will then hand over to those who are coming on. The attendant who was on for the weekend will then hand on to those who are coming to be on call for the week. So we take the handoff, and after that, you review the chat. Reviewing the chat to know who is who and what's going on, and what are their needs and why they consulted the ethics department. When that is done, then we will, of course, head to the ward as it may be required or necessary to the hospitals. If that means meeting with a family member, if that means making calls. But of course, we are fellows now, so we shadow the attending. We're not kind of taking on that responsibility now. But when Jesse talked about hands-on or on the ground and hands-on experience, that's exactly what that means. It means that we are working every moment with the attending, so we are having that hands-on experience. We are having that on-the-ground experience every time. So we go through all of that. If it means having family meeting, of course, also the attending will schedule the meeting, and we have the opportunity to participate and to chime in as it may become necessary, and also have the opportunity to learn. She also talked about simulation. So these things come to life. The simulation comes to life when you have the opportunity to be able to attend or participate in the family meetings as well. In the hospitals also, doctors have and the nurses attend, hospitalists have rounds. Different hospitals have rounds at different times on different days. We also have the opportunity to attend the rounds. That way you're able to have a good understanding of what happens in a hospital environment. And when we have a patient, by that I mean when a patient that the ethics department has been consulted about or on, then we're able to also to see and to hear what other things that may be going on in the patient's life, other than or apart from the very aspect on which we were consulted. So that gives you a broader picture of what's going on with the patient. And also that gives us the opportunity to see that, hey, there may be other patients where we can help. And then we can bring that to the attention of either the attending physician or the nurse or whoever may be necessary or responsible for us to reach out to. So rounding gives us that opportunity as well. Also, we have what is called a tracker here in Wellstar, where the ethics department try to keep a track of every patient of every individual we're consulted on. So at the end of the day, when the consult has been kind of done and everything that we've resolved whatever that was consulted on, then we put that patient in a tracker so that at the end of the year we can keep a tally of how many patients we worked on for the year to be able to see the volume of consult, if that is going down or if it is going up. That gives you at the end of the year a good to be able to tell exactly the amount of consult, the volume of consult you had for the year. So we have the opportunity to work on that as well. And when all of this is done at the end of the week on Friday, then also there will be handoff. Handoff is also when we're going to hand over to the attending who is going to take care of the region. Jesse mentioned earlier that one person takes care of all the 3 regions on weekend, because, well, it's just 3 days and sometimes depending on what happens, but it might be low or it might be high volume, but one person takes care of that. So those who were on during the week will then hand over to the person who is coming to take care of the region, the 3 regions for the weekend. So that is a kind of a brief review or a quick recap of a day in the life of a fellow. Kelly, you may chime in to see if there are things I missed. It's something you want to add.
Sure, thanks, Vera. I think the only thing to add about the on-call weeks, Jesse mentioned we have 3 regions and they're all very different from one another. So a week in Region 1 looks very different than a week in Region 3. So Region 1, you're primarily based at Kennestone. Our office is, 5-minute walk from Kennestone. So you're just kind of going into the hospital when you're on call, kind of in the morning into the early afternoon. You come back to the office, you write your notes, you go home. Region 2 and Region 3, because there's a little bit more geographic distribution, when you're planning your day, you're like, oh, we might need to drive out to North Fulton up in, sort of Roswell, Alpharetta, or we might need to drive super west over to Douglas. So I think you're getting sort of a range of like what ethics consultation looks like when you're covering multiple hospitals, and that means you have to triage appropriately, or if you're like sort of just based at one hospital and you're trying to figure out how to maximize sort of ethics presence in that hospital. So I can transition to our off-call weeks. I want to make sure we have enough time for everybody's questions, but so as Jesse mentioned, we're a very high volume service. On call is intense. You're learning a ton in those weeks. So I think correspondingly, your off call weeks are a little bit more flexible and a little bit more sort of relaxed by design. So you have time to digest everything you learned when you were doing consults. And you're, again, you're working on any number of the sort of typical non-consultation activities of a clinical ethicist. So you're doing some education, you're teaching. So for example, I just co-taught an emergency nursing fellowship, kind of intro to ethics with one of our attendings on Tuesday. You're doing some policy review. So we just worked on our kind of code status, DNI, DNAR policy yesterday with Jesse. And then we have our regular fellow educations, which we try to schedule when you're off call if possible. You could work on your QI project, that's sort of long-term, or you're doing sort of research and writing, catching up on the things that, you didn't get to do when you were on call. So in terms of kind of where you are for those off-call weeks, it's a mix of work from home and in person. Mondays and Fridays, we're typically working from home. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we're going to each of the 3 offices. So the system office, our Region 1 office, and our Region 2 office. And that gives you an opportunity to sort of, hang out with the other attendings. You can still listen in on the cases and, whatever they're doing when they're on call. To just sort of kind of maintain, our team presence. Yeah, so I think that's sort of a brief summary. Burra, anything to add?
Yes, also, I think this is part of the time when we take to do our scheduling, that we have the time we work, but we also try to catch up and take a break. So we try to do our scheduling, and if we need to hang out, yes, we do.
I'll briefly talk to you guys a little bit about why I train at Wellstar. I could give you a whole laundry list of reasons, but we're short on time, so I'm going to try to be brief about it. Very large, very collegial clinical ethics team. As I said, I'm on call right now. I have talked to I think 4 different members of our team today about different aspects of care and things. So we're always leaning on each other. That doesn't end when you leave the fellowship. So I think that's great. We're a high volume service. I think that speaks for itself. Just the breadth of what you get to see has been touched on a lot. It's fabulous. What I think is the major strength of our fellowship is that you have a cohort of 3 fellows. Last year, when I was a fellow, I was at ASBH, and we ended up doing a lunch with multiple other fellows. And a lot of them were talking about some of the loneliness that they have felt because they were sort of alone, or maybe there was one other fellow that was like the year ahead or the year below them. At Wellstar, there are 3 of you. You get to sort of lean on each other, have somebody in this shared experience with you, which I think is really, really valuable, because being a fellow, no matter where you are, is a vulnerable experience in a way that's hard to understand if you're not in it. So I think that's super valuable. And then just a little bit of a snapshot of sort of where our fellows have ended up. We've had 11 clinical ethics fellows since the start of the fellowship. All 11 of us currently work in healthcare. 10 of the 11 are employed as clinical ethicists. The other one works in a sort of like patient safety role that she elected to do. So everybody has kind of gone the path that they have wanted to go, which is really, really exciting. We have people clearly at Wellstar. There are many of us who have done the fellowship. Emory Healthcare, which is also here in Georgia, Banner Health, Providence Health, MedStar, Washington Hospital Center. So we've got people all over. All of that's accessible online on our website if you want to look at that, where people are. We try to keep that as up to date as we can. So I'll pass it back over to Jessie.
Thank you so much, Bridget. Okay, we'll skip over the application process just because we're very short on time. My apologies, I probably talked too long. But if there are any questions, Lily, in the chat, would love to be able to answer those right now.
Okay, we have some. Okay, I'm going to go with the first one that I saw. With the new edition of the ASBH core competencies being released, do you anticipate any changes to clinical ethics training?
Great question. So we are actually waiting for our copies to arrive. We ordered them as soon as they became available. So those are en route now. Obviously, we'll have to kind of take a look and see, what's been added in there. And once that's the case, then there might be some adjustments, but obviously we want to keep to the most up to date, core competencies. So maybe it's a possibility, but I think I imagine that the essential competencies are going to remain the same. I know there was like an organizational ethics section, I think, that was added, and maybe some other changes. So once they arrive and we have a good chance to kind of look at it and sort of see how it maps into our program, then we'll certainly make adjustments as appropriate.
Okay. Next question is, it's fantastic to hear that ethics is involved in rounds. With that, do you feel that there's a greater familiarity and perhaps appreciation for the ethics service among providers and staff than you would see at other institutions?
Yeah, I think so. And I'll definitely, if someone else wants to chime in as well, I think that, that's kind of been a huge part of our integration efforts, to really go in round at the different hospitals. I think we've seen it lead to increased consults. And I think it also helps with developing rapport with different providers and familiarity. So it's not just like, who's this, ethics, like we're not just behind our computers in our rooms, offering recommendations. We're there, we're in person, we're on the floor, we're meeting, we're establishing connections. And so I think that is certainly an integral to us being as integrated as we are into the system. And I think Bridget was going to say something.
Yeah, I'll add. I think everything Jessie said is exactly right. I do think that participating in rounds very much helps us be more integrated, familiar with the teams. Where I did some previous training, they did not do rounding. That wasn't part of their practice. And we did spend, I think, more time there explaining sort of like who we were, what our purpose was, and those kinds of things. We don't entirely skip that here, but we spend a little bit less time on that because people are more familiar with us being around. And so we have the rapport and the trust built in because they're used to us being around. I think that helps with the like sort of ethics police kind of idea where like, we're not that, we're here, we're also part of the clinical team.
Kind of related to that question is, how integrated are bioethicists within the healthcare system? Are they well known by staff, basically?
Yeah, I think it's I say, oh, generally, yes. I think, every hospital is going to have its own, you could probably have that question answered, based on each hospital. But I think we as a team in the last few years have made a very deliberate effort to really integrate ourselves in various hospitals. And that's done in different ways. We have rounding, as we've talked about. We've done a lot of education, as we've talked about. We have residents rotate with us, and some residents, so then they're knowing to consult ethics, and then some residents get hired on. And so now they're attendings, right? So we've done, we think through a variety of different ways, worked to establish rapport and develop connections such that we are integrated within the system. We also run a system-wide ethics grand rounds every other month, where we have people can join from across the system, and we rotate hospital sites so that way everybody can come in person. We try to make, open that opportunity. But even if we're not at that particular hospital site, where it's opened up to folks on the team across the system. And so we have other ways that we also try to incorporate and involve providers across the system, so that they know who ethics is, and that they're familiar with us. And as I said, all the way from leadership to on the ground education to rounding, we've I think across the system have done that. And I think you could talk about each specific hospital and talk about what exactly has been done there. Every hospital has culture and vibe is going to be a little bit different, and so we've kind of adjusted based on that.
Okay, I see 3 more questions in the chat. So could you speak a bit more about the QI project that a fellow would undertake?
Sure. Yeah. So as I said, it's a pretty small scale project. I can give you maybe a couple of examples. That might be the easiest, just to give you a sense. So I don't know if Bridget, if you want to briefly talk about what your project was. Yeah.
Yeah, I can. So I actually recently completed mine. So I made sort of like a reference tool for our team to help us understand sort of like what is required for different discharge options. So we as a team have been involved a lot more in difficult discharge situations. And so I knew nothing about is it appropriate for this patient to go to a long-term acute care or subacute rehab, or what's the difference? Like, what does this even mean, kind of thing? So I created a tool, did a lot of research, talked to different care coordinators, those kinds of things, used their expertise to sort of understand what the difference is so that we can be prepared when we enter these family meetings. And the family says, no, we want them to go home. And we say, well, they require X, Y, or Z sort of situation that makes them more appropriate for this situation. So I created a tool that could help our team be a little bit more educated, more able to prepare for those sorts of meetings. I know my co-fellow Abby did an in-service at one of our places where she did sort of like a pre-intervention test, like, what do you know about ethics, those kinds of questions. Did the in-service, and then afterwards did a sort of like post a month or 2 later, just to see sort of how is that working. So she did that. Jonathan, my other co-fellow, did a sort of like revamp of our tracker and trying to help integrate that with our handoff sheets that we use to help each other out. So that's just the 3 that we did, but I don't know, Jesse, if you want to talk about any of the other ones you've seen.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I never said this when I first introduced myself. So I was actually part of the first fellowship cohort back in 2019. So I started off as a fellow, and then now here we are as I kind of help oversee the fellowship. So when I was a fellow, I'll just give you an example of what I did. I did a kind of like a shadowing tool where different attendings would kind of shadow one another. And the idea was to look for, are we being consistent in our ethics practices in terms of, how our process, how do we do intake? How our next steps, how we plan out, how we triage, things like that. And so I developed this kind of rounding tool, and we implemented it at that point. So again, the quality improvement can really be what you make it. If there's something that you're really interested in, we can talk through and brainstorm, okay, how can we frame this or shape this into a QI project? Again, it needs to be something that is doable within the course of a year. So it's not going to be some huge, long, big project. It needs to be something that is like, how can we improve the internal processes of an internal process of our ethics department? Or is there something even, provider facing or patient facing that we could do, that again is achievable within the course of the year?
Okay. So what are the most important factors in your selection of fellows? And alongside that, do you have a preference for applicants with clinical experience?
So to answer your first question, I think, there's in terms of like what qualities might we look for? Obviously, somebody that demonstrates an interest in clinical ethics. That's obviously important. Somebody that's receptive to feedback. We obviously offer a lot of feedback here, and somebody that's willing to, as Bridget said before, you can be in a little bit of a vulnerable position when you're a fellow because you're training. It's possible that you've never even set foot into a clinical space before, or you have very limited experience, and so you're developing these new skills and trying things out throughout the course of your fellowship. So somebody that is receptive to feedback. I think somebody that's adaptable. And I think that's part of also being a good clinical ethicist. You might go in Monday morning and say, okay, I looked at the chart. This is what my plan is going to be. And then you get 3 new urgent consults coming in, and that's all out the door. And now you have to adjust and be adaptable there. So I think that's an important quality that a fellow has as well. I think somebody that's organized, right? The fellow, as hopefully you've picked up on, there's a lot of balls in the air that you're juggling as a fellow, consult requirements as well as other requirements. And so being able to be organized and, keep all of those balls in the air and make sure that you remain on pace and on track, I think is really important. And organization is a key part of that. Somebody that's really eager to participate, right? The fellowship is going to be what you make of it, and so someone that's going to a go-getter that's going to take advantage of opportunities, is a really something that we're looking for, and that's going to really seek out to make the most of their experience in the fellowship. Somebody that's reliable and responsible, right? Especially as our fellows progress in the fellowship and they're taking call, we're gonna, as the attendings, we want to know that when the fellow is taking call, they're going to answer the call accordingly, and they're going to take the appropriate next steps, even when I'm not directly supervising them, right? So being somebody that's responsible and reliable, I think, is a key feature of a good of a fellow. And I think finally self-awareness. Somebody that is self-aware, that's able to recognize, okay, these are my strengths, these are areas I need to work on. Recognizing that, hey, on day 1 of my fellowship and where I'm in the shadowing role, I shouldn't go in and start taking over a family meeting, right? Somebody that just has the self-awareness of where they are in the fellowship, and what where their place is, and not in. I just want to be clear, we're not like a hierarchical, like, oh, the fellows go here and the attending. We're very inclusive. I think Burra and Kelly, you're certainly welcome to speak to that. Every single thing that we do, fellows are encouraged to be part of. But there's obviously times, especially early on in the fellowship, where the fellow is more in an observing role, and so making sure that they're aware that is that's the role that they're in, I think is important. And then, of course, as they progress, then, of course, they're taking point and taking lead. So I think self-awareness is another really important feature. Regarding your second question, we don't, it's, if someone comes in with clinical experience, wonderful. But we're not going to not consider somebody just because they don't have clinical experience. If they have, their educational background, they've done a lot of studying in clinical ethics or bioethics or a related field, and has the strong interest in pursuing clinical ethics, we're gonna consider them, of course. So someone is not going to be discounted just because they don't have clinical experience.
Okay, final question. Is there a culture of collaboration on scholarship/research?
Yes, there is. So we have, as on our team, we collaborate all the time on articles. Bridget and I just submitted an article
Yes, we did.
about a week ago. We, as a team, about 2 years ago, we wrote an article as a team where we all collaborated on that and submitted, and I think it was published in the Journal of Clinical Ethics. So yes, to answer your question, yes, very collaborative. We're a very collaborative team generally, but then also when it comes to scholarship, absolutely. Another colleague of mine, Mike, and I worked on a paper with some folks from other health systems, and that's going to be published soon. So yeah, we very much are encouraged, and enjoy working with one another on articles, and fellows are 100% encouraged and invited, when there's opportunities to also join in on that. And then we also have a whole research team. So we have Dave and Nicole, who are kind of our research department, and so they are always willing and happy to work with you or with anybody on the team to kind of engage in any research that person might be interested in.
That is all the questions that I see in the chat. I'm so sorry that we're so short on time. So if anybody else has any other questions, we will put up our contact information. Please feel free to reach out to us. I think there it goes. So feel free to reach out. I will also send out an email with information how to contact us if you have further questions. And yeah, thank you guys so much for coming. This is really exciting. We really hope to hear from you soon. And thank you so much.
Thank you.